Shabbat Shalom. My name is Noel. This is the Unexpected Cosmology. I just had I'm in another hotel room, as you can see, or my office. And brownie points to the coffee selection here. They had these different flavors, and they had a hazelnut coffee. And I put in the hazelnut, and I'm like, this just isn't any good. So I'm drinking the green tea right now. Last week, I had Pamela on. I put her comment right here, and great times. I know a lot of you really love that. I wish I could bring on a guest speaker every single week. I wish every single week I could be on here with a different guest speaker. But, in this environment, it's like, I love Pamela to death. She's amazing. It's hard to find anybody that disagrees with you and doesn't call you a heretic. So, it's a bit venomous out there. Anyways, I would love to bring on more people, but alas, you are stuck with me this week. Hopefully, it doesn't chase anybody off. We're in the second week of Exodus, or SHAMA'UATH, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, the Paleo Hebrew, which is, of course, Pamela's translation. And as also promised, we're going to have this book available very, very, very soon for public sale and for reading and so on and so forth. Can't wait. And there was something else I wanted to say before I dive into this. Oh yeah, there will be no late show tonight. Unfortunately, I'm sorry for the sad news. And if you do stick around to the end, I have a special treat for you. We're getting into the Exodus account tonight. How exciting! And of course, what I love about it is they don't cram it all into 1 week. You get it over 2 weeks. But at the end of this, I'm going to be reading the Exodus, or the Passover events, from the Egyptian perspective, from the Colbrin. And it's wild. I mean, it's like loaded, like how dark this event was. It's crazy to read. Can't read it. I can't wait to read it for you guys. So let's get right into this. And well, hopefully the sound is good for you guys. If my internet is choppy, I am paying extra for it in my office. So if it is choppy for you guys, I would rather fix it right now. If there's anybody else saying that it is choppy for them, please don't hesitate to write a comment in there. I know there's a certain number of you watching right now, because I would hate to get to the end of a 2-hour recording and hear it was choppy the whole time. Anyways, here's our meme to start us out for the night. Pharaoh's heart hardened even further after Moses busts out guitar and sings, "Pharaoh, Pharaoh, whoa, baby, let my people go." I'm not going to sing that for you, but I thought that was pretty funny. All right, I'm going to quickly read. Because last week, Pamela was doing a great job talking about the name of the father and so on and so forth, where we ended at the burning bush. So I'm going to cover a little bit of last week's Torah portion. Can you believe it? I'm only 2 weeks in Exodus. I'm already like way behind. So, oh, good. It's working for you. Thank you. All right, here we go. But while he was so we just ended at the burning bush. That's the context. And Moshe is on his way to Mitzrayim to confront Pharaoh at this point. But while he was upon the road at a resting place, Yahuwah encountered him, and he searched out to kill him. What? Now, if you read the Greek Septuagint, I think it specifically mentions there an angel of Yahuwah. And some of the thought on that is that maybe they put that there to lessen the blow, because it's pretty intense that this is Yahuwah, the Alahayam of Yasharal, who's coming to personally kill Moshe. But Zipporah or Zepharaha took a sharp stone, and she cut the foreskin of her son, and she cast it to his feet, and she declared, "For a bloody bridegroom you are to me." So he let fall his hand from him. Then she said, "A bloody husband you are because of the circumcision." So why didn't Moshe circumcise his son? Well, the thought is because he was pretty handicapped by this point, because she interceded only after her husband was pretty much dead. Like, he's almost dead at this point. Yahuwah is taking Moshe out. And so she actually cast it at his feet. The idea is like he's already on the ground at this point. He's not standing up. All right. So when we see this section here, this is what Yasher has to say about it. And Moses rose up to go to Egypt, and he took his wife and sons with him, and he was at an inn in the road, and an angel of Allahayam. So there you see it says an angel there. It doesn't directly say Yahuwah as the Paleo or the Masoretic states. An angel of Allahayam came down and sought an occasion against him, and he wished to kill him on account of his firstborn son, because he had not circumcised him. So if you didn't get that before, when his wife Zipporah actually goes and circumcises, takes a rock, just cuts it off right there on the spot out of desperation. That's the reason why, in case you didn't pick up on that. Because he had not circumcised him and had transgressed the covenant which Yahuwah had made with Abraham. For Moses had hearkened to the words of his father-in-law, which he had spoken to him, not to circumcise his firstborn son. Therefore, he circumcised him not. And Zipporah saw the angel of Yahuwah seeking an occasion against Moshe, and she knew that this thing was owing to his not having circumcised her son Gershom. And Zipporah hastened and took off the sharp rock stones that were there, and she circumcised her son and delivered her husband and her son from the hand of the angel of Yahuwah. So that pretty much states it right there. I was going to read you Legends of the Jews, Volume 2. They even gets more wacky because, you know, Legends of the Jews rarely let you down. But I think it's pretty straightforward that the reason being was because Moshe listened to his father-in-law. Actually, well, let me go ahead and read this real quick. Elohim was ill-pleased with Moshe for this artifice, and he spake to him, saying, Joseph prophesied long ago that the oppression of Egypt would endure only 210 years. For his lack of faith, Moshe was punished while he was on the road to Egypt. That's really interesting. And so they're tying a connection in the Legends of the Jews that Moshe already has faith issues. And that's not a good thing, because if you're the guy who's you and your brother Aaron are supposed to lead this people, and you have to be a glutton for punishment. You want to lead any group of people, much less the Hebrews, the Torah folk. And he's leading them for 40 years, and he has to teach them the law, and yet he hasn't even followed through with his own son. All right. So he's clearly got lack of faith issues, especially since, well, let me finish this. The angels, Oth and Hema, appeared and swallowed his whole body down to his feet. I don't know if these are like worm angels, this is like Dune or something or what. And they gave him up only after Zipporah, nimble as a bird, circumcised her son Gershom and touched the feet of her husband with the blood of the circumcision. The reason why their son had remained uncircumcised until then was that Jethro had made the condition, when he consented to the marriage of his daughter with Moshe, that the first son of their union should be brought up as a goyim or a Gentile. So the idea here is that, how in the world can you lead a people if you're not leading your own children, right? You're not leading your own son. He is actually raising his son as a goyim, as a Gentile. And this may actually speak a bit on how estranged Moshe might have been from Yahuwah at this point. So he's called, he knows he's on the mountain of Yahuwah. He's called by him, and he's kind of like, really? Like me? You want me of all people? Like, send someone else. Like you can clearly see how unqualified he feels here. He hasn't even circumcised his own son. And so for me, this intervention by Yahuwah is like, you need to get your house in order. Like, yeah, you're a dead man if you do not do this. All right, now I'm going to jump into let's see. Bereshith. So I think here that he wanted Moshe, Yahuwah wanted Moshe to really understand this covenant that he was supposedly supposed to be advocating here, which we first see in Bereshith chapter 17. And this is what it says. When Abram was 96 years old, Yahuwah, the ever-living, revealed again to Abram and said to him, I am Al Shaddai, walk before me and be you perfect. And I will give a covenant between me and between you, and I will increase you very, very greatly. Now let's skip down to the next yellow print, and it says, Allahayam also repeated to Abraham, now this is the covenant which you shall keep as well as your seed after you in their generations. This is the covenant which you shall guard between myself and your seed after you. Circumcise every male of them, and they shall be circumcised in the foreskin of the body for a distinguishing mark of the covenant between myself and them. All right. Now let's get even more controversial here and dip into Paul. Dun, dun, dun. And the reason I'm doing this is because it got brought up last week, and people, I was getting asked, why aren't you talking about circumcision? I would have loved to. We didn't get that far in the discussion, so I'm trying to make up time here. Now, this comes from Galatians 2. And the thing is that a lot of my followers, you guys are, anti-Paul. I used to be there at one time too. For any new viewers, you're like, what's going on with this? And I actually have a channel on our Discord, The Unexpected Cosmology. You come over there, and we have a Paul discussion group where you can kindly talk about why Paul is the big bad wolf, the villain. And I don't mean that sarcastically. It's a place where I feel that it's a discussion that should be had. Now, I was there at one time, and actually, this year I want to write a whole commentary on Galatians. Galatians is a wild book, and I'll be honest, I'll still pick up Galatians, and I'll go like, "What are you saying, Paul? What you talking about, Paul? You're doing away with the Torah again, aren't you?" But it's one of those things when you really wrestle with it, and it's so easy to just go, "Okay, yeah, he's doing away with the Torah." But when you really wrestle with it and you just like, what are you saying here, Paul? And try to understand this. And then I'm like, and then he just blows my mind. I'm just like, this is absolutely incredible. I can't believe, like the anti-Paul crowd is going to hate this, but it's like, I'll say, I didn't get it. I really didn't get it. And this is incredible stuff. So the way it's like is I would encourage, there's an analogy I like to use in The Wizard of Oz, the original L. Frank Baum book, not the movie. And in the original book, when Dorothy and her three friends, her three Theosophist friends, are coming up, the Emerald City is just beyond the hill. They can't see it yet. They get to a toll booth or a guard gate, and the guard is like, okay. Before you go over this hill, you have to put on these emerald shade glasses. And they're like, why? And he says, well, if you go look at the city, it's so glorious, you'll go blinded. I think you might even die. I can't remember the text, but it's like you'll definitely go blind. So you got to put on these glasses. And they're like, okay. So they believe them. They put on these glasses, and lo and behold, you find at the end of the book that the city was never emerald. It was the glasses that did it, right? And so a lot of times when we look at these arguments, like with Paul, it's almost like depending on the shade of glasses you're wearing. I mean, you could put on glasses and like every single thing he says is suspect and awful and antichrist and villainous. And then you put on these other shade of glasses and go like, oh no, he is the truth, and he is scripture, and none of the other Bible matters because he did away with the Torah. You see what I'm saying? But what if there's a third or fourth or fifth way of looking at this? What if it's not just, antichrist or, well, antichrist? What if it's not just doing away with the Torah? What if there's something else going on here? And what if he was one of the greatest patsies ever? So let's just read this real quick. Again, I will remind you that when it comes to like maybe Paul not circumcising somebody, like here, then after 14 years, I went up again to Jerusalem with Barnabas, and also took Titus with me. And I went up by revelation and communicated to them the gospel which I preach among the Goyim, but privately to those who were of reputation, lest by any means I might run or had run in vain. Yet not even Titus, who was with me, being a Greek, was compelled to be circumcised. Dun, dun, dun. Well, who else didn't circumcise was Moses. So just before we throw Paul under the bus for this, might as well throw Moses under with him. Just throw him out. And this occurred because of false. I say that because I don't think Paul's perfect, and I'm okay with that. And this occurred because of false brethren secretly brought in. Who are these false brethren? There's a YouTube channel out there that is advocating that this circumcision group was actually the Jerusalem group. I actually fell for that. I actually really believe that. I believe that the circumcision group was Peter and James and all that. And didn't have any, it took me a while to understand the historical context here. The circumcision group was a group of Pharisees who were literally going around stating that these were open discussions in the first century that you could not be saved unless you were first circumcised. And this, and of course, Yahushua HaMashiach disagreed with that because he never said that. He said you had to be baptized, and that was part of the argument. So according to this, that throw Yahushua HaMashiach under the bus as well, because he was not circumcising for salvation, and this occurred because of false brethren secretly brought in who came in by stealth to spy out our liberty, which we have in Christ, or I should say Yahushua HaMashiach, that they might bring us into bondage, to whom we did not yield submission even for an hour, that the truth of the gospel might continue with you. So what he's saying here is that, like, it's almost like Paul is saying, like, he did not circumcise Titus just to spite these people. All right. So take that for what you will. And I'm looking forward to actually doing a whole commentary on this. And I feel like this really needs an in-depth series and to kind of peel back the onion layers of what's really going on here. And so this is really interesting here. This is kind of towards chapter 6, talking about circumcision again. And, knowing that Paul is he's really big about circumcision of the flesh is to no avail if you don't have a circumcision of the heart, right? Circumcision of the heart has to come first. See what with large letters I have written to you with my own hand. He's hastily writing this letter, and, it's kind of a temper tantrum letter. As many as desire to make a good showing in the flesh, these would compel you to be circumcised, only that they may not suffer persecution for the cross of Christ. For not even those who are circumcised keep the law. You see how I highlighted this here for you. But they desire to have you circumcised, that they may boast in your flesh. Now, I have to say that if there was ever a circumcision group, it was coming over to Camp Torah, to the Torah keepers. I have found it doesn't matter where you go, even if you go to Camp Christianity, whatever, there's tons of fakers there. There's more fakers there than anywhere. But there are so many fakers here. There are so many people who claim to be Torah, and they make all these profile pictures and all these things about how Torah they are. And they go in Torah groups, and then you find out that they're like, they're eating pork every meal and, things like that. Just like, it's like, no, you're clearly not keeping the Torah. You want everyone to think you are, but you're a phony. But then you have these other people who are even bigger phonies, and they're who Paul's talking about here. They don't even keep the Torah themselves. They just want everyone else to be circumcised so they can boast in the fleshiness, right? This is the big thing between the flesh of Ishmael versus the spiritual nature of Yitzhak. And this is why I pointed out in the past what's so important for me, maybe it's not important for you, but so important for me to understand that Yitzhak was a divine conception, that he was not actually a fleshly conception through Abraham. He actually came through Yahuwah, through Sharaha. And that anyone who's grafted into Israel through Yaakov, through Yitzhak, is of a spiritual heritage, not fleshly, right? And I just watched so many people in here where they don't get it. They don't have a circumcised heart. They don't have that gnosis of understanding that the Torah is a transformative document, and they just go around and they want everybody else to keep it. And they themselves don't keep it. And that's what Paul's saying here. He's like, look, I didn't circumcise this guy just to spite you, because you guys just want to boast in this and you don't even keep the Torah, and he keeps it more than you guys do. That's the whole point he's making here. Now, again, you can agree to disagree, but wanted to cover that. And again, I don't want to offend. I can never have these discussions without offending tons of people. Apologies. I don't hold Paul's letters to be capital scripture. I think that the dude was a dude writing letters, and in that way, I give him the grace to be wrong. I'm wrong about tons of things. So if I'm going to hold him up to a standard of, if he's wrong about anything, he's going to hell. He's going to Sheol and he's never getting out of that place. Well, the scary thing is that Elohim is going to judge each of us, or Yahuwah is going to judge each of us as we judge others. That's a terrifying thought. I'm wrong about so many things. I'll use the G word. I want grace. I want grace to be wrong about things. And I want to give grace to other people to be wrong too. I want to give grace to Moshe. Be like, yeah, you didn't circumcise your son, dude. Like, you really royally messed up there, and you almost died as a result of that. Like, I didn't even do that. Like, I circumcised my sons. I'm above Moses on that. But you want to give the guy grace, right? So, all right. Let's get right into it tonight. I wanted to cover that. The rest of last Torah portion, you guys know, he goes to Pharaoh, heart and heart. Whoa, let my people go, that kind of stuff. All right. So here we are, this week's chapter 6, verse 2, verses 9 through 35. Yahuwah, the ever-living, actually, this is starting in 6:1, not that that matters. Yahuwah, the ever-living, however, answered Moshe, behold, I will gift you as Elohim unto Pharaoh, and Aaron, your brother, he shall exist your prophet. Therefore, you must speak all that I command you to your brother. And he shall repeat to Pharaoh that he must send forth the sons of Yasharel from his land. But I will make Pharaoh's heart obstinate. I will multiply off my evidences and off my wonders in the land of Mitzrayim. The Pharaoh will not hear and obey unto you. So I will lay my hand upon the Mitzrayim and will bring up my people, the sons of Yasharel, from the land of Mitzrayim with great judgments, so that the Mitzrayim will intimately and completely know that I am Yahuwah, the ever-living, when I stretch out my hand over Mitzrayim and bring up the sons of Yasharel from among them. When was the last time you were ever asked to enter a conversation and try to convince someone of some sort of truth, and you know in advance that it's just going to fall on deaf ears and it's never going to happen? I would think in a lot of ways, some people would think that would be very defeating. I would think that that would be very liberating, because now I'm entering a conversation where all I do is just speak truth. I'm not worried about my reputation, so to speak. I'm just going to speak truth to them, and I'm not going to try to convince them. That releases me of the burden of having to convince someone of the truth. Just speak truth to them. And this is what Moshe is going to do. He knows going into this that Pharaoh's heart not going to give in. Now, whether or not he accepts what Yahuwah says or not is a different, question to be had. And the reason I say that is because we see in the commentary that he's kind of it's questionable all of what the priests of Midians were really advocating. Clearly, it seems to be that the priests of Midian at this point were anti-circumcision, and Abraham, Moshe obviously went off in that direction. He thought that, okay, I won't circumcise my son. I'm under this priesthood. So, it's questionable about how much Moshe at this point, clearly all understood and knew. And if I were to read to you more like Legends of the Jews and Jasher and things like that, it would talk about, Yahuwah kind of criticizes Moshe, going like, you don't believe these prophecies. You don't believe these things that have already been spoken. So Moshe and Aaron fashioned like that which Yahuwah, the ever-living, had commanded them. In that manner they did it. But Moshe was 80 years old and Aaron 86 years old when they spoke to Pharaoh. So think about that. The next time you want to retire and you're in your 70s or 80s, Yahuwah may send you on your biggest mission ever. and oh man, retirement, 40 years in the wilderness with the Hebrews. No, thank you. That's Yahuwah, the ever. I say no, thank you. That's sarcastic. Thus Yahuwah, the ever-living, spoke to Moshe and Aaron, saying, since Pharaoh has said to you, give us evidence. Instruct Aaron, take your branch before Pharaoh and before his ministers, and he will exist of, Pamela here puts the word thunuyan. And that is, you can see there the note, dragon or sea monster. That totally tripped me out when I saw it, because all other Bibles just say serpents, like a snake. And when I saw that, that just totally tripped me out. And I'll show you why in a little bit. Moshe and Aaron therefore went to Pharaoh and did as Yahuwah, the ever-living, commanded. And he cast down his branch to the face of Pharaoh and to the face of his ministers. And he will exist of Thunuyan. And that, again, that's the note there for dragon or sea monster. But Pharaoh, so this is like giving me the picture that this is literally a dragon. Like, this isn't just a snake. Like, it became like something like a I think of like a dinosaur-like creature type of thing, on two legs, maybe, the size of a human or something like that, or maybe like something as large as a crocodile or something, but it became something really big. But Pharaoh summoned the wise men and enchanters, and they, the sacred scribes, fashioned a flaming metal rod. That's really interesting translation there. They fashioned a flaming metal rod, and he cast down every man his rod, and they existed of dragons. It's almost like a like they become like lightsabers. That's how I'm envisioning it. Like Darth Maul, and then they throw it down. These dragons come up. But Aaron's branch devoured their rods. However, the heart of Pharaoh was strong, and he would not listen to them, just as Yahuwah the ever-living had foretold. All right. So let's talk a little bit about the rod of Yahuwah. This was something that I didn't cover last week. I wanted to. And in fact, I'll be expected to be a video in the next couple weeks. The reason I didn't record it, I had the script all ready to go. And then I'm studying for this today. And I'm like, oh my goodness, because if you recall, I talked about, if you guys watch my videos, I did this whole thing on King Arthur and the prophecy of Merlin of the white and the red dragon. All right. Maybe I'll ring some bells for you right now. I'll be talking about that tonight. But let's talk about the rod of Yahuwah. So this is the rod that Moshe has in his hands. This is what Jasher has to say. This is contextually when he is he's arrived in Midian, and he wants to marry Zipporah, Jethro's daughter. And it was that while he prayed, he looked opposite to him, and behold, a sapphire stick was placed in the ground, which was planted in the midst of the garden. So this sapphire stick, it's planted in the garden. And he approached the stick, and he looked, and behold, the name of Yahuwah Elohim of hosts was engraved thereon, written and developed upon the stick. And he's like, well, that's interesting. He recognizes the Elohim. And he read it and stretched forth his hand, and he plucked it like a forest tree from the thicket, and the stick was in his hand. And this is the stick with which all the works of our Elohim were performed after he had created heaven and earth, and all the host of them, seas, rivers, and all their fishes. So this is tripping me out right here. And this is before I read Pamela's translation about the dragon. And I'm going, because you guys remember all like the Leviathan research I went through, and how the god of Eden was the seven-headed Leviathan, and they claimed that he was the one that created the world. And so you have this war between like this female serpent god who supposedly created the world, or Elohim created the world, and you see it like in the Baal cycles and all this stuff. And so now you got a stick that becomes a serpent, actually becomes a dragon, and with this stick the world was created. So you can see me like just like hyperventilating as I'm reading this, in a good way. I'm like, flipping out like this is awesome, I love research. So this is the stick with which all the works of our Elohim were performed after he created heaven and earth, and all the host of them, seas, rivers, and their fishes. And when Elohim had driven Adam from the Garden of Eden, he took the stick in his hand, and I'm guessing he being Adam, and went and tilled the ground from which he was taken. And the stick came down to Noah and was given to Shem and his descendants until it came into the hand of Abraham the Hebrew. And when Abraham had given all he had to his son Yitzchak, he also gave him this stick. And when Yaakov had fled to Padam Aram, he took it into his hand, and when he returned to his father, he had not left it behind him. Also, when he went down to Egypt, interesting here, it totally skips over Yehuda and his stick. So that's kind of interesting. And when he went, and I'll be talking about that in the video, not tonight though. And when he went down to Egypt, he took it into his hand and gave it to Joseph, one portion above his brethren, for Yaakov had taken it by force from his brother Esau. And so I actually think this stick went to Reuben, and then when he lost the birthright, it went to Yehuda. And after the death of Joseph, the nobles of Egypt came into the house of Joseph, and the stick came into the hand of Reuel and the Midianite. And when he went out of Egypt, he took it in his hand and planted it in his garden. So if you get that swap there, Joseph, he's got it in his hands. As soon as he dies, Egyptians go in, they loot his house, take all his things, and they have the stick. Reuel, he is the priest of Midian. He's in there, he sees it, and he, like, out of a duty, I think to Yahuwah, he goes like, I know the stick, I know the name on that stick. This does not belong here in Egypt. He may have even known its history and what it was purpose for, and he straight up stole it from Pharaoh. He just stole it and ran off. He took it in his hands and planted it in his garden. And all the mighty men of the Kenites tried to pluck it when they endeavored to get Zipporah, his daughter, but they were unsuccessful. So all these men lined up, and nobody can pull the sword from the stone, prove their worth to marry his eldest daughter. So that stick remained planted in the garden of Reuel until he came who had a right to it and took it. That would be Moshe. And when Reuel saw the stick in the hand of Moshe, he wondered at it, and he gave him his daughter Zipporah for a wife. All right, so this now comes from the Legends of the Jews. Let's see what they have to say about it. One of the 7 maidens whom Moshe saw at the well attracted his notice, in particular on account of her modest demeanor, and he made her a proposal of marriage. But Zipporah repulsed him, saying, "My father has a tree in his garden, with which he tests every man that expresses a desire to marry one of his daughters. And as soon as the suitor touches the tree, he is devoured by it." Moses said, "Whence has he the tree?" And Zipporah said, "It is the rod of the Holy One." Let's see if you guys can read that. "Blessed be he, created in the twilight of the first Sabbath eve, and gave it to Adam. He transmitted it to Enoch. From him it descended to Noah." They added the Enoch in there, right? They didn't say that in Jasher. "Then to Shem and Abraham and Yitzchak, and finally to Yaakov, who brought it with him to Egypt and gave it to his son Yosef. When Yosef died, the Egyptians pillaged his house and the rod, which was in their booty, they brought to Pharaoh's palace. At that time, my father was one of the most prominent of the king's sacred scribes, and as such, he had the opportunity of seeing the rod. He felt a great desire to possess it, and he stole it and took it to his house. On this rod, the ineffable name is graven, and also the 10 plagues that Allahayam will cause to visit the Egyptians in a future day, which we'll hopefully cover tonight. For many years, it lay in my father's house. One day, he was walking in his garden carrying it, and he stuck it in the ground. When he attempted to draw it out again, he found that it had sprouted and was putting forth blossoms. That is the rod with which he tries any that desire to marry his daughter. He insists that our suitors shall attempt to pull it out of the ground, but as soon as they touch it, it devours them." All right. So here we have the sword and the stone, sword and the anvil here. And in Le Morte de Arthur by Thomas Mallory, there's a quote from it there: "Whoso pulleth out the sword of the stone and anvil is rightwise king born of all England." And of course, Robert de Baron said in Merlin, "Arthur, kneeling, took the sword in both hands and raised it from the anvil as easily as if nothing held it, and carried it back held high. They led him to the altar, and he laid the sword upon it. And when he had done so, they blessed him and anointed him and performed all the rites necessary for making the king." Now, just quick note here, this is not Excalibur. Excalibur is a different sword. And I personally think what's happening here, now this I've noticed years ago, I'm like, the sword and the stone story is a lot like the Jasher story. And is it possible that they were creating this story? Was it repetitive, or were they creating a story based off of Jasher? Well, now that I've got into the Millennial Kingdom research, this hit me, and I'm like, I think this is legitimate. I think this happened. And what I don't have here, the quote in front of me, when I put out my video in a couple of weeks, you could read this. You could read the article now on my website. I talk about how this rod apparently passed to Joseph of Arimathea, and in the Book of Britain, it straight up says that he went with this rod to Britain, and after he died, it passed to his disciple, a female disciple, and the Druids were coming up and challenging her, and she actually planted this, and it sprung flowers, just like it did for Reuel in the garden. So really interesting stuff, and I wonder if there was a situation where, because we see in Revelation that Yahushua will come in the Millennial Kingdom, he will rule with a rod of iron. And I wonder if this is the same rod, the same staff of Moshe. And if there was a situation that arose where he came and he plucked it up and proved his worth. And then the Arthurian writers basically to pull away from that, they had their king Arthur do the same thing. So this is what really tripped me out when I talked about the dragons, because if you recall, I did this presentation. It's also an article. It's going to be my book that's going to be released next month, the 7,000 Year Timeline Deception. And I talk about King Arthur, the prophecy that Merlin gave regarding to Pendragon, the idea that the red dragon represents Arthur and the white dragon represents this new kingdom that was about to come in, the Saxons, who, if you know my theory, I believe the Saxons were the sons of Yitzhak, right, the house of Israel. And it said that this white dragon would come in and conquer the red, and that when that would happen, they would rule for a time, but then the red dragon would return. And you can see all right here, it talks about the red dragon the white dragon signifies the Saxons. The red denotes the true British nation. That would be Arthur and Camelot. And you can see here on the Welsh flag, they have chosen that their identity is the red dragon. You can see the war there between the red and the white dragon. The white dragon represents, I believe, Yahushua HaMashiach. And so when you see his staff become a dragon, and then the magicians, their staffs become dragons, I'm thinking this is the red and the white dragon. And I'm thinking this is the white dragon that fought the red dragon and ate them up. I mean, I was tripping out when I saw that. I'm like, oh, it's a repeat in Arthurian legend with the end of Camelot being destroyed. But, the New World Order, they look at Camelot as their version of the true kingdom, whereas Camelot was destroyed by the true kingdom, the Dark Ages, right? So anyways, and then quickly here, this is King Henry VII, father of King Henry VIII, of the many wives of King Henry VIII. King Henry VIII, of course. So King Henry VII, he's the one that first raised the red dragon again. Really interesting. He was the one to apparently fulfill this prophecy of Merlin that the red dragon would return. He raises the red dragon. He starts the house of the Tudors, and his son, King Henry VIII, was shockingly, like nobody told me this. I had to discover this. He destroyed like 800 Millennial Kingdom structures, like shocking amount in like several short years. He just went on a rampage, destroyed them all in England, not in other countries. Just that they're just ruins. So that's pretty telling. All right. And then let's see, what do we got here? For lack of time, I'm trying to figure out what I have. This long Jasher passage. Wow, this is long. I'm gonna read to you guys anyways. Here we go. Let's have fun tonight. Let's read. Jasher chapter 79, 19 through 57. I need a quick drink of tea. And Moshe and Aaron came to Egypt, to the community of the children of Yasharel, and they spoke to them all the words of Yahuwah, and the people rejoiced and exceeding great rejoicing. Of course, they always rejoice in the beginning, but then the crowd turns pretty quickly. And if you just study the biography of Moshe, which we will for the following year, and the crowd is always turning pretty quickly. And Moshe and Aaron rose up early on the next day, and they went to the house of Pharaoh, and they took in their hands the stick of Alahayam. And when they came to the king's gate, 2 young lions were confined there with iron instruments. And no person went out or came in before them unless those whom the king ordered to come, when the conjurers came and withdrew the lions by their incantations, and this brought them to the king. And Moshe hastened and lifted up the stick upon the lions, and he loosed them, and Moshe and Aaron came into the king's house. The lions also came with them in joy, and they followed them and rejoiced, as a dog rejoices over his master when he comes from the field. Kind of reminds me of a lion and a lamb situation there. The coming of the kingdom, where the lions would be not be ferocious on all his holy mountain. Not the whole world, mind you, just his holy mountain. And when Pharaoh saw this thing, he was astonished at it, and he was greatly terrified at the report, for their appearance was like the appearance of the children of Alahayam. I love that line. And Pharaoh said to Moshe, "What do you require?" And they answered him, saying, Yahuwah Alahayam of the Hebrews has sent us to thee to say, send forth my people that they may serve me. That's when they broke out into the song. And when Pharaoh heard their words, he was greatly terrified before them. And he said to them, maybe he needed every time I hear Pharaoh talking, it reminds me of James Earl Jones, the voice of Darth Vader. If you guys ever watch those Hanna-Barbera Greatest Stories Ever Told, which I still love that series. I watch it. I show it to my children all the time. But the voice of Pharaoh in the Exodus one is actually James Earl Jones. So I can't hear Pharaoh without hearing Darth Vader talking, which I'm not going to try to mimic. But in your head, you can hear Darth Vader talking. And go today and come back to me tomorrow. And they did according to the word of the king. And when they had gone, Pharaoh sent for Balaam the magician and to Jannes and Jambres, his son. So there you go. If you ever wanted to know when Paul talks about Jannes and Jambres, the only source information really we have on them comes from Jasher, interestingly enough. And for everyone out there trying to say that the Jasher is a later hoax, it's like, oh yeah, the Jews were trying to prove Paul, I guess. But interesting enough, it says that they're Balaam's sons. And to all the magicians and conjurers and counselors which belonged to the king. And they all came and sat before the king. And the king told them all the words which Moshe and his brother Aaron had spoken to him. And all the magicians said to the king, but how came the men to thee on account of the lions which were confined at the gate? And the king said, because they lifted up the rod against the lions and loosed them, and came to me. And the lions also rejoiced at them as a dog rejoices to meet his master. Can you imagine that? If that is actually a scene, man, I need to do a whole paper on this. Can you imagine if that was the scene in the millennial kingdom where Yahushua HaMashiach, he comes to Britain? You guys know that I think that like in our realm, Britain was like ground zero. The stone of scone was there. The staff of Moshe or Yahuwah, or you could say Joseph of Arimathea was there. Can you imagine like pulling up the staff and then just like walking and like, you know, the lions come bounding up to him, you know, lion and the lamb right there, right? Can you just imagine that scene? And all the kings of the earth are just like perplexed at this. And the king, and I, by the way, I think that when he came, I don't think it was just overnight, you know, hallelujah. I think it was very similar to this. I think that people's hearts were super hardened when he came. And I showed that in past papers. And the king said, because he lifted up the rod against the lions and loosed them and came to me, and the lions also rejoiced at them as a dog rejoices to meet his master. And Balaam, the son of Beor, the magician, answered the king, saying, these are none else than magicians like ourselves. Now therefore send for them and let them come, and we will try them. And the king did so. And in the morning Pharaoh sent for Moshe and Aaron to come before the king, and they took the rod of Alahayam and came to the king and spoke to him, saying, thus says Yahuwah Alahayam of the Hebrews, send my people that they may serve me. And the king said to them, but who will believe you that you are the messengers of Alahayam, and that you come to me by his order? Now therefore give a wonder or sign in this matter, then the words which you speak will be believed. And Aaron hastened and threw the rod out of his hand before Pharaoh and before his servants, and the rod turned into a serpent. And the sorcerers saw this, and they cast each man his rod upon the ground, and they became serpents. And of course, now it's like, I'd like to see, I'd like to see Pamela have a shot at translating Jasher. And the serpent of Aaron's rod lifted up its head and opened its mouth to swallow the rods of the magicians. And Balaam the magician answered and said, this thing has been from the days of old, that a serpent should swallow its fellow, and that living things devour each other. Now therefore restore it to a rod as it was at first, and we will also restore our rods as they were at first. And if, remember, these are like lightsabers, right? Like these things like, you know, glow. Right? And if thy rod shall swallow our rods, then shall we know that the Ruach of Alahayam is in thee. And if not, thou art only an artificer like unto ourselves. And that's quite the challenge. It's kind of like, you know, just keep moving the goalie net, right? And Aaron hastened and stretched forth his hand and caught hold of the serpent's tail, and became a rod in his hand. And the sorcerer did the like with their rods. That had to be an incredible scene to watch. And they got hold, each man, of the tail of the serpent, and they became rods as at first. And then when they were restored to rods, the rod of Aaron swallowed up their rods. And when the king saw this thing, he ordered the book of records that related to the kings of Egypt to be brought. And they brought the book of records, the chronicles of the kings of Egypt, in which all the idols of Egypt were inscribed. For they thought of finding therein the name of Yahuwah, but they found it not. Now, that's maybe it's because they were looking at the book of idols, right? And Yahuwah is not an idol. But this is what I talked about in past weeks, that Yahuwah had to have been scrubbed. And I think this is further evidence of how easily history is scrubbed and rewritten, because we're seeing it happen right here. We're literally seeing that Joseph, not that much longer, was second in command. And according to Jasher, he actually becomes first in command after Pharaoh dies. He is ruling Mitzrayim, and he's worshiping Yahuwah, and yet there's no record of him. So how in the world does that happen? Well, it happens pretty easily, actually, depending on who's in charge. And that's how easily our own history is rewritten. When we're talking about, like, did the millennial kingdom already happen? Yeah, they can scrub it. They can scrub the whole thing. And Pharaoh said to Moshe and Aaron, behold, I have not found the name of your Elohim written in this book, and his name I know not. And the counselors and wise, it's almost irony, because they say the same thing about the Exodus, right? They're like, I see no record of the Exodus in any of these books, right? It's like, well, yeah, of course you don't. Though there is actually proof of it. I should back that up a little bit. But and Pharaoh said to Moshe and Aaron, behold, I have not found, oh yeah. And the counselors and wise men answered the king, we have heard that the Elohim of the Hebrews is a son of the wise, the son of ancient kings. That's interesting. Let me say that again. We have heard that the Elohim of the Hebrews is a son of the wise, the son of ancient kings. Are they talking about Yahuwah here being the son of the Most High? That's interesting. And Pharaoh turned to Moshe and Aaron and said to them, I know not Yahuwah whom you have declared, or the Lord. It could be Adonai, I'm not really sure there. Neither will I send his people. And they answered and said to the king, Yahuwah, Elohim of Elohim is his name. And he proclaimed his name over us from the days of our ancestors and sent us, saying, go to Pharaoh and say unto him, send my people that they may serve me. Now, therefore, send us, and we may take a journey for 3 days in the wilderness, and there may sacrifice to him. For from the days of our going down to Egypt, he has not taken from our hands either burnt offering, oblation, or sacrifice. And if thou wilt not send us, his anger will be kindled against thee, and he will smite Egypt, either with the plague or with the sword. And Pharaoh said to them, tell me now his power and his might. I could totally see James Earl Jones saying that. And they said to him, he created the heaven and the earth, the seas and all their fishes. He formed the light, created the darkness, caused rain upon the earth and watered it, and made the herbage and grass to sprout. He created man and beast and the animals of the forest, the birds of the air and the fish of the sea, and by his mouth they live and die. Fasting right there, because he's basically describing a bunch of different gods of Egypt who he's about to take out. Surely he created thee in thy mother's womb and put into thee the breath of life, and reared thee and placed thee upon the royal throne of Egypt. And he will take thy breath and soul from thee and return thee to the ground whence thou wast taken. And the anger of the king was kindled. I could totally see how he'd be angry at that. He's like, how dare you say that your God put me in my throne? Like, just the audacity to come here in front of me and say that, like, off with your head. And he said to them, but who amongst all the Elohim of nations can do this? My river is my own, and I have made it for myself. And he drove them from him, and he ordered the labor upon Yasharel to be more severe than it was yesterday and before. And here's where the crowd turns. Like that one, that went south pretty quickly. And Moshe and Aaron went out from the king's presence, and they saw the children of Yasharel in an evil condition, for the taskmasters had made their labor exceedingly heavy. And Moshe returned to Yahuwah and said, why hast thou ill-treated thy people? For since I came to speak to Pharaoh, what thou didst send me for, he has exceedingly ill-used the children of Yasharel. It's like Moshe didn't, he was probably imagining in his mind what it might be like for Pharaoh not to listen to him, but he wasn't thinking this. And when these trials come, this is where it hits the fan. This is where separates the boys from the men. And you see many people when they see these kind of things happen, that they just fall away from the faith, right? And we've been through this with the Book of Wisdom and some of those where the Book of Britain, where these things happen to chisel us and to form us into this. We go through these trials, even though they're painful and they don't make sense to us, to actually mold us more into the image of Elohim. And this is what Yahuwah is about to call them out, and he's like, really, this is like boot camp right now. He's training them for what they're about to go through. They're kicking and screaming the whole way, but and only the most fit are going to make it through, right? The most spiritually fit. And Yahuwah said to Moshe, behold, that will see that with an outstretched hand and heavy plagues, Pharaoh will send the children of Yasharel from his hand. And Moshe and Aaron dwelt amongst their brethren, the children of Yasharel in Egypt. And as for the children of Yasharel, the Egyptians embittered their lives with the heavy work which they imposed upon them. Now, quick to note here, did you just notice that according to Jasher, it said they went to live with the children of Yasharel? So all they did is they went to Pharaoh, they threw down their rods, serpents, nothing came of it. they went to live with the Asherel. And according to Jasher, 2 years passed between this and the next plague. 2 years. They're living with them. Another thing to note here is that why is Aaron and Moshe not in the field working? I thought they were all slaves. Well, if you recall, I think I read you the text. The Levites never gave consent to be ruled as slaves. And so that's the problem, the fix we're in, is that our parents and their parents and their parents have slowly consented more and more for us to be slaves until we're in this predicament. And we're like, how in the world did we get here? And so we're trying to, hopefully learn from this and pull our children further out of slavery. But that's what the Levites, they never consented. And so they did not have to be in the fields working. They're over there doing their priestly duties, learning the Torah, learning the law. And Moshe and Aaron could just walk around and bother Pharaoh all day. He could not force them. He could not whip them into the fields because they didn't give their consent. Really interesting to think about. All right, Yahuwah, the ever-living, getting back into the Paleo. Yahuwah, the ever-living, then declared unto Mashaha, the heart of Pharaoh is not easily moved to allow the people to depart. Confront Pharaoh in daybreak. Behold, he rises up to bathe, and you will stand opposite to meet him at the edge of the river. When he calls out, you will take the branch which turned into the Nakash. So there, Nakash actually means serpent. And Pamela left it there, Nakash, the word. Let me just see. Let me look at the bottom of the page just to be sure. Sure, yeah, serpent. Nakash is serpent. In your hand. Then say to him, Yahuwah, the ever-living Allahayah of the Hebrews, has sent me to you to say, send forth my people, that they may serve me in the wilderness. Now keep in mind, according to Jasher, 2 years have passed. Behold, if you will not listen to that, thus says the ever-living, by this you will learn that I am Yahuwah. When I strike with the branch which is in my hand upon the waters which are in the river, they shall turn to blood, and the fish which are in the river shall die, and the river shall stink, and the Mitrae will become exhausted trying to drink of the water of the river. Yahuwah, the ever-living, also said to Mashaha, declare unto Aaron, take your branch and extend it over the waters of Mitzrayim, over the flowing streams, over the brooks, the pools, and over all the reservoirs of water, and they will become blood. And they shall be blood in all the land of Mitzrayim, both in wood and stone. Pamela, if you're here, I'm actually curious. I didn't ask Pamela on the side this because of preparing. I wish I did. When she's translating this as branch, how does she picture this? Is this literally like a branch, like a wand, like a magician's wand? Or are we dealing with, I always, I talked about, the rod, right? The staff that Moshe has, but then it also talks about a branch, right? So I think of something like from Harry Potter or something like that. Therefore, Mashaha and Aaron did as the ever-living commanded, and he lifted up the branch and he struck off the waters which were in the river before the eyes of Pharaoh, before the eyes of his ministers, and all the waters in the river turned to blood, and the fish which were in the river died, and the river stank, and the Mitrae were not able to drink of the water from the river, for it became blood in all the land of Mitzrayim. The sacred scribes of Mitzrayim, however, did the same in their mysteries. I love that line. Thank you, Pamela, for putting that in there. Where I checked because I didn't see other translations with mysteries. I think I saw like sorcery or magic, but the sacred scribes of Mitzrayim, however, did the same in their mysteries. Of course, they're coming out of the mystery religions, the mysteries of Isis and different things like that. Therefore, the heart of Pharaoh was strengthened, and he would not listen to them. He's like, look, that's messed up what you did to my river, but you should be punished for it. But my magicians can do the same thing. So I'm you probably just learned it from them. You grew up in Egypt. Just as it's, whatever, snake oil salesman, whatever. Just as Yahuwah, the ever-living, has foretold. Pharaoh therefore turned his face and went back to his palace and did not alter his heart even for this. But all the Mitzraim dug pits along the river for water to drink, for they were not able to drink the waters from the river. This continued for 7 days after Yahuwah, the ever-living, had attacked the waters of the river. All right, getting back into Jasher, let's see what it says. And at the end of 2 years, Yahweh, so again, 2 years. Now imagine this, like you're going into Egypt to, to free the people. You're on a mission from God, from Allahayam. You go there, go in front of him. You're like, let my people go. He's like, nope, not gonna do it. And you're like, okay, and you just leave and you go live amongst the Egyptians. 2 years pass. 2 years. That's like, COVID time. I mean, you're just and like all the people are like, okay, you're here to free us. What are you gonna do? Like, I don't know. I don't have another plan. That was it. So kind of interesting. A lot could have gone down in the 2 years, and it doesn't help now that he's probably not too popular that they're having to work harder because he's there. So how do you think that goes over on your Shabbats? So at the end of 2 years, Yahuwah again sent Moshe to Pharaoh to bring forth the children of Yasharel and to send them out of the land of Egypt. And Moshe went and came to the house of Pharaoh and spoke to him the words of Yahuwah who had sent him. The Pharaoh would not hearken to the voice of Yahuwah. And Allahayam roused his might in Egypt upon Pharaoh and his subjects. And Allahayam smote Pharaoh and his people with very great and sore plagues. And Yahuwah sent by the hand of Aaron and turned all the waters of Egypt into blood with all their streams and rivers. And when an Egyptian came to drink and draw water, he looked into his pitcher, and behold, all the water was turned into blood. And when he came to drink from the cup, the water in the cup became blood. And when a woman kneaded her dough and cooked her victuals, their appearance was turned of blood. Then Yahuwah, the ever-living, declared to Al-Mashaha. That's really fascinating. I need to do like a whole study too on how sometimes the names of these patriarchs would have El or Al in front of it as a representation of Allahayam. Anyways, Yahuwah says to him, go to Al-Pharaoh. Interesting comparison there, right? He's not calling him Pharaoh now. He's Al-Pharaoh. And say to him, thus says Yahuwah, the ever-living, send forth my people to serve me. But if you will not send them, then I will plague all your dominions with frogs, and the flowing stream will swarm with frogs, and they will go up, and they will enter in your house, and in the chamber of your resting place, and upon your bed, and in the house of your servants, and in your people, and in your ovens, and in your kneading bowls, and in you, and in you, and in your people, and in all your servants, the frogs will come up. Wow, Yahuwah has really thought through this. Like, he's getting very descriptive about what will happen. And Yahuwah, the ever-living, declared unto Al-Mashaha, tell Al-Aaron, stretch out your hand over the flowing streams, the rivers, and over the marshes, and cause to come up frogs upon the earth, or Aratz Mitzrayim. Aaron consequently stretched out his hand over the waters of Mitzrayim, and frogs came up and plagued the land of Mitzrayim. The sacred scribes, however, did the same with their hidden arts, and they also brought up frogs upon the land of Mitzrayim. Pharaoh, however, summoned Mashaha and Aaron and said, entreat all Yahuwah. Just pause here. And I've said this so many times that one of the great miscalculations that Christianity has done is sold this idea that the Bible is a monotheistic book. Okay, it is not a monotheistic. I mean, you guys know this. My listeners know this. I'm preaching to the choir at this point. But I tell this so a lot. There's this idea that that Christianity holds a monopoly on prayer. That you pray to your God and He will answer your prayer, but all the other people, they're praying to nobody. Right. And that's actually not what happens. I mean, you can have, there are many gods, as you guys know. You could pray to this God, and this God can listen to you, and He can answer your prayer. Good luck with that, with having a covenant with that God. But the idea here is that we just saw that these magicians who were under the sway of these Elohim of Egypt, and I didn't prepare tonight this study, maybe next year, all the different, how each of these plagues, you guys have probably all heard it before, but how each of these plagues identify with a different Elohim. It's interesting that they are calling out to their Elohim and they're able to perform. So that's one of the things that, like, when people aren't like taught this and they come to find this out and they freak out and they like leave the faith. It's like, really? Because you heard there were like other gods and stuff, and how I guess none of this is true anymore. And it's like, no, they're you can pray to many different gods and be healed or whatever, have your prayers answered. Apparently other gods can bring frogs out of the bloody water. Pharaoh, okay, so let's see. Pharaoh, however, summoned Moshe and Aaron, said, entreat Yahweh, the ever-living, that he may turn away the frog from my eyes and from my touch, that I will release the people, and they shall sacrifice to Yahweh, the ever-living. Isn't that interesting that his magicians could not take the frogs away? They could bring them, but Moshe, the troublemaker, brought them out. They couldn't do away with them. But Moshe replied to Pharaoh, you glorify yourself upon me, until when I should pray for you and your servants and your people to drive away the frogs from you and from your place, except that there may be a few in the river. What do you think those nights sounded like? If you guys have ever been, next to a noisy chorus of frogs, man, if they're in your kitchen too, and in your bathroom, and in your kneading bread, and in your bed, oh man. And he said, to this time tomorrow, and he will declare, it will be done as you say, so that you may know that there is none like Yahuwah, our Allahaya. And the frogs will turn back from you and from your place and from your servants and from your people. Only in the flowing stream will they remain. And Moshe and Aaron went out from Pharaoh. I think that answers the question. They weren't toads. They went back to the flowing stream. He cried out toward Yahuwah, the ever-living, because of the bar, or the matter of the frogs, which he had promised to Pharaoh. And the ever-living did just like the matter set in order by Moshe, and the frogs died from the houses, from the streets, and from the fields. And they piled them into heaps. Have you guys, we've probably all seen frog bones. Can you imagine all those frog bones? They'd be digging those things out for years to come. They'd be finding all those frog bones. Just when you thought you got them all, you overturn another stone, and there's like 3 or 4 more. And they piled them into heaps, corrupted, rotting, and the land stink from all that wonderful frog flesh. Rotting frog flesh. But when Pharaoh observed that relief existed, then his heart grew vehement, and he would not listen to them, just as Yahuwah, the ever-living, had foretold. Now, scientifically here, you can see the cause and effect. You could see how the flies would come next, and so on and so forth. And it's almost like each one gets more exponential as they go along. Okay, Yasher chapter 80. Let's see what this says about the plagues. And Yahuwah sinned again and caused all the waters to bring forth frogs, and all the frogs came into the house of the Egyptians. And when the Egyptians drank, their bellies were filled with frogs. That is so disgusting. And they danced in their bellies as they danced when in the river. Lovely thought. So next time you think about drinking water, there's a frog in the, they're just like born, there's like inside of you. And all their drinking water and cooking water turned to frogs. Talk about a frog boiling in a pot. Also, when they lay in their bed, their perspiration bred frogs. Good times. Consequently, Yahuwah, the ever-living, getting back into the Paleo, declared to Moshe, say to Aaron, stretch out your branch and beat the dust of the earth, and it shall become as gnats in all the land of Mitzrayim. Lovely. Are these like those biting, like noceums that, tear up your legs? The sacred scribes also tried by their hidden arts to fashion the same and bring forth gnats, but they were not able. So this is where it cuts off. They could do the snakes or the dragons. They could do the blood. They could do the frogs. Apparently, they can't do the gnats. You would think gnats would be easier to produce than frogs, but, go figure. If I had to perform a magic trick and deliver 100 frogs out of my hat or 100 gnats, which do you think I could deliver easier? These gnats assailed both men and beast. And then the sacred scribes reported to Pharaoh, this is the finger of Allahayam. So they're finally like, his own wizards are like, they're getting it now. They're like, this is beyond our gods. This is truly the finger of Allahayam. That's such an exciting phrase there. Confession. But Pharaoh quenched his heart and would not listen to them, just as Yahuwah, the ever-living, had foretold. Therefore, Yahuwah, the ever-living, declared toward Al-Mashahah, arise at daybreak and stand yourself up to the face of Pharaoh. Behold, he is going out into the waters, and you will say to him in this matter, thus says Yahuwah, the ever-living, release my people, and they will serve me. For if you do not send away my people, I will myself send against you and your servants and your houses a horde of gadflies. And the houses of Mitzrayim will be filled with the horde, and also the ground which they are upon. And I now keep in mind, this is like I said, it is a cause and effect. Some people don't like to hear that. You can kind of see the cause and effect. You got a lot of you got a bloody water, you get the frogs coming out, and then the frogs die, and then the flies and the gnats come in. But keep in mind that Yahuwah is like, look, I can refrain this. I can keep this from happening. If you just repent, right? And the houses of Mitzrayim, and of course the other gods, as you recall, cannot get rid of it. And the houses of Mitzrayim will be filled with the horde, and also the ground which they are upon. And I will make the land of Goshen or Gashan, upon which my people dwell, to be distinct in this day, for the horde shall not be there. So there you go. So that you may know that I am Yahuwah, the ever-living, am in the midst of Harats or Ha'arats, the earth. I will make a distinction between my people and your people. Tomorrow, this sign, he will exist. Excuse me. And Yahuwah, the ever-living, did it. For swarms of gadflies came into the palace of Pharaoh and the houses of his servants, and to all the land of Mitzrayim, the gadflies spread over all the land. Then Pharaoh summoned Mashahah and Aaron and said, walk, sacrifice to your Allahayam in this country. But Mashahah replied, we were not instructed to do so. For if we were to sacrifice the idol of the Matzrayah in their sight, would they not stone us? Well, let me say that again. For if we were to sacrifice, the idol of Mitzrayah in their sight, would they not stone us? We must walk for 3 days' journey into the wilderness and sacrifice to Yahuwah, the ever-living Allahayah, as he has commanded us. Then Pharaoh answered, I will send you away, and you shall sacrifice to Yahuwah, your ever-living Allahayah, in the wilderness, only in departing, walk not a long journey. Now entreat for me. And Mashahah answered, I will go forth from you and pray and entreat Yahuwah, the ever-living, and he will turn back the gadflies from Pharaoh and from his servants and from his people tomorrow. Nevertheless, Pharaoh should not continue to deceive and not allow the people to go away to sacrifice to Yahuwah. All right, let's see what Jasher has to say. Notwithstanding all this, the anger of Yahuwah did not turn from them, and his hand was stretched out against all the Egyptians to smite them with every heavy plague. And he sent and smote their dust to lice, and the lice became in Egypt to the height of 2 cubits upon the earth. The lice were also very numerous in the flesh of man and beast, and all the inhabitants of Egypt, also upon the king and queen. Yahuwah sent the lice, and it grieved Egypt exceedingly on account of the lice. Notwithstanding this, the anger of Yahuwah did not turn away, and his hand was still stretched out over Egypt. And Yahuwah sent all kinds of beasts of the field into Egypt, and they came and destroyed all Egypt, man and beast, and trees, and all things that were in Egypt. And Yahuwah sent fiery serpents. You see, I highlighted there. I'm going to talk about that tonight. So he sent fire. So this wasn't talked about in the Masoretic, interestingly enough. He sent fiery serpents, scorpions, mice, weasels, toads, together with other creeping in dust. I'm going to quickly comment here that in the past, like in my Seraphims, the Wasteland paper, and others, I talked about how fiery serpents can easily be, in heavenly terms, the seraphim angels. All right, the fiery ones, the fiery serpents. They're serpentine reptilian creatures that are the fiery ones. However, and you also see a fiery serpent that's put on the pole in the Torah as well. We'll get to it later this year. And in the account where the fiery serpents come down to kill everyone in the plague in the children of Israel, I commented, are those angels? Are those seraphim reptilian angels coming to kill everybody? Now, here what's interesting is that these fiery serpents that come in, they could be the angels, but they are also numbered amongst actual animals: scorpions, mice, weasels, toads, and other creeping things. And so, is this one of those on earth as in heaven things? Is there an actual creature on this earth, or did there used to be, who somehow was kind of compared or represented to these seraphim angels? All right, so I'm going to look at that a little bit in a few minutes. Flies, hornets, fleas, bugs, and gnats each swarm according to its kind. And all reptiles and winged animals according to their kind came to Egypt and grieved the Egyptians exceedingly. I'm in this really scary chair. There's no armrest, and I keep thinking there are. And it's like I go like I'm lying. Like, just wouldn't you love it if like I fell over, you see my feet come up, and I'm like, ow. So I feel like I'm going to fall on this chair. And the fleas and flies came into the eyes and ears of the Egyptians, and the hornet came upon them and drove them away. This is intense, just in Jasher. And they removed from it into their inner rooms, and it pursued them, the hornets. They're following them into every room of the house. That sounds lovely. You can't roll in the water, apparently, because it's blood. And when the Egyptians hid themselves on account of the swarm of animals, they locked their doors after them, and Allahayam ordered the Sulanuth, which was in the sea, to come up and go into Egypt. Now, I have spent the last several years of my life trying to figure out what is the Sulanuth. Apparently, other people have too, and there are no answers to be found on the internet. Maybe there is some book out there that we have yet to discover. I would assume that would be the case, where the Sulanuth is described. But as you can see here in the next verse, and she had long arms, so it's a she, and I told you Leviathan is a she, and she had long arms, 10 cubits in length of the cubit of a man. It actually reminded of Godzilla, actually, here, coming out of the sea, with like the hands out and stuff like that, and like ripping open rooftops and coming down on them. And she went upon the roofs and uncovered the rafting and flooring and cut them, and stretched forth her arm to the house and removed the lock and the bolt and opened the houses of Egypt. If that's not a horror film, then I don't know what it is. Afterward came the swarm of animals into the houses of Egypt. So now we're like in Jumanji here, right? Like the rhino and the hippo are like bursting through the, up the staircases. And the swarm of animals destroyed the Egyptians and it grieved them exceedingly. All right, so here we have a picture here of someone's depiction of a seraphim angel. Kind of interesting. It's a fiery one. They should have made it more, I think, reptilian looking. But then we have here a kind of like a pterodactyl type of creature. And it has been speculated if these are the fiery serpents that are being talked about. You can see here on the far right where they literally put a flying snake on a pole for that incident. You see there all the fiery snakes coming in, or the winged snakes coming in and biting everybody. And I'm of the mindset that we're supposed to deny that dinosaurs existed, apparently, because all fossils are a hoax or whatever. But I'm of the mind that these dinosaur dragon, these dinosaurs were much more serpentine dragon looking than they make out in the modern films. And I do have some evidence to back that up. Actually, a lot of evidence to back that up. But this is interesting because this is Herodotus, and I like to quote from him every so often. And he's talking about these winged serpents that lived in Arabia and Egypt. There is a place in Arabia situated very near the city of Buto, to which I went on hearing of some winged serpents. So he hears this report. He wants to go check this out for himself. And when I arrived there, I saw bones and spines of serpents in such quantities as it would be impossible to describe. So he's saying, I guess, thousands of them. It is reported that at the beginning of spring, winged serpents fly from Arabia towards Egypt. But the ibises, those would be like a type of stork. I'll show you a picture. He says a sort of bird. Meet them at the pass and do not allow the serpents to go by, but kill them. So these cranes or these storks, ibises, I guess, appropriately, they love to eat these for dinner. They find them, they fly down. So that tells us that these winged serpents are not that big. If they can fit in the mouth of a crane, of a big bird, that that they're big like a snake, but they're not huge. So whatever, if these are like pterodactyl type creatures, they would have been like bat size by this time. The form of the serpent is like that of the water snake, but he has wings without feathers and as like as possible to the wing of a bat. I think he's describing a one of those pterodactyl type creatures. And then we again see Herodotus say in another book, again, Arabia is the most distant to the south of all inhabited countries. And this is the only country which produces frankincense and myrrh and cassia and cinnamon and gum mastiche. All these except myrrh are difficult for the Arabians to get. They gather frankincense by burning the storax note, which Phoenicians carried to Hellas. They burn this and so get the frankincense, for the spice-bearing trees are guarded by small winged snakes. So they live in these spice trees. They're of varied color, many around each tree. So it's interesting because they're not like this is a straight brown color. They would be like multicolored, just like a snake. These are the snakes that attacked Egypt, or they attack Egypt. Nothing except the smoke of storax will drive them away from the trees. So they smoke them out. Now, Josephus, he talks about an interesting account when Moshe, I'll give you the story real quick. And Moshe, this is contextually, I skipped this last week when I made the comment that Moshe lived a life like Forrest Gump. You know, he had like all these different adventures before he went to Egypt. And he became a king of a city. And the way he became king of the city, actually Balaam and I think his sons were king of the city. He ran them out, and this is how he did it. But Moshe prevented the enemies and took and led his army before those enemies were apprised of his attacking them. For he did not march by the river, but by land, where he gave a wonderful demonstration of, I'll just skip all this. You can see where it's highlighted here. So let's see. Well, actually, I always say that. Then the next sentence is really awesome. For when the ground was difficult to be passed over because of the multitude of serpents, which had produced in vast numbers. So basically Balaam, he put like this pit full of these winged serpents. He put them all there so that they would come and just bite you and kill you and, you know, peck out your eyes and probably poison and, you know, that kind of stuff. And there's no way to get past them, right? And it said, which it produces in vast numbers, and indeed is singular in some of those productions, which other countries do not breed, and yet such as are worse than others in power and mischief, and an unusual fierceness of sight, some of which is sent out of the ground unseen and also fly in the air. So that's really interesting. They live in the trees, they live in the ground, in like holes, probably caves. They come out like bats. They come and fly in the air. They peck your eyes out. They kill you. And so come upon men unawares and do them a mischief. So this is like straight up Jurassic Park stuff. Moshe invented a wonderful stratagem to preserve the army safe and without hurt, for he made baskets like unto the arks of sedge and filled them with those birds again, the ides. Same one that Herodotus talked about, and carried them along with them, which animal is the greatest enemy to serpents imaginable, for they fly from them when they come near them. And as they fly, they are caught and devoured by them, as if done by the hearts. All right, so this same story, by the way, that Josephus talks about, where did he source that information from? He got it from Jasher. It's one of the other evidences that, and the Jews, by the way, hate Josephus. Like, they're not giving this guy credit. So he probably sourced this from Jasher. So this is what they look like. These are the birds that Moshe put into the baskets and he released and ate all these fiery serpents, these winged serpents. And we see Herodotus say the same thing. So I'm not going to read this whole story here, but this is in Jasher where it talks about it. You can read it for yourself in Jasher chapter 75. And here's an interesting medieval French wood carving of one of these winged serpents. And as you can see, it looks like a serpentine creature. I mean, it's just very coiled and everything like that. And I actually think that these dinosaurs were much more coiled, serpentine looking like this than they're made out in the films. And again, I have some more evidence for that. But anyways, this appeared to be in the Dark Ages, you know, the medieval age, that they were seeing them still and engraving them. I'm not going to go into all this tonight. I wanted to touch it last week, but this was commenting on the connection I was making here was in Jasher, where it talks about that the time Moshe is put into the basket is when all the children were being killed off and they were put into gardens. You guys remember I covered this in the Children of the Mud Flood presentation, and they were put in the gardens, and the Egyptians tried to like mow them over, and they couldn't. So they were just sprouting out of the ground. So it's really interesting when you get into the 1800s, you see very similar terminology being used of all these children cropping up without parents. We were discussing beforehand about all the parents going, all the adults going to these insane asylums. And then you get all these children all over the world. They're being shipped off on trains. You got all this, these postcards here, just, women lifting them up in gardens, and they're shaking them out of trees. Here you have an incubator right here, all the incubator babies. Here they are being hatched on farms, all these children coming out of places. The connection I wanted to make, let's just skip some of this, is with the storks. So where are the storks? There's the orphan train. There are all the babies on the trains. But here's the storks. Now, what's interesting about storks is that, keep in mind, these are the ones that are eating the fiery serpents, the biggest enemy to these fiery serpents. And there's a connection, I think, between on earth as it is in heaven. Storks are seen as spiritual creatures. I actually took my sons, and of course my wife as well, to see The Boy and the Heron. It's a Studio Ghibli film. I love Studio Ghibli films. It's Japanese anime films. And they get it right on so many issues. And this one was about the heron, which is a type of stork, type of crane creature that has the ability to transcend the material into the spiritual realm, kind of the gateway between the two. And that's how these are perceived. That's why the storks were delivering all these babies in the 1800s. You have just tons of photos of them. This is a creepy one here where it's a baby apparently being born out of a cabbage patch. I mean, that's kind of like, what's going on with that? And here you have more bunch of babies coming out of cabbages, cabbage parades. But anyways, the stork. And so the storks are the ones that are eating these fiery serpents. I find that really fascinating. So they're like the one enemy, the fiery serpents. And they are also, identified with carrying babies into this world from the soul sea. They could transcend into the spiritual realm, take the pre-existent souls, deliver them. Anyways, interesting stuff to be found there. Let's see. Do I have time to read all this, even though it's probably all awesome? No, I don't. All right. That's just covering what I already talked about all the children being born in the fields, how Balaam is trying to kill them off, and they're just raking these babies up, and they're just all these Hebrew children. This is coming out of the earth, and the angels are feeding them in the earth. All right. Continuing with SHAMA'UATH, we're probably in like chapter 7 or 8 at this point. Moshe accordingly went forth from the face of Pharaoh and prayed to Yahweh, and the ever-living answered Moshe and removed the gadflies from Pharaoh and from his servants and from his people, and none remained. Pharaoh, however, made vehement his heart even after this, and would not send away the people. Consequently, Yahweh, the ever-living, said to Moshe, go to Pharaoh and tell him, thus says Yahweh, the ever-living Elohim of the Hebrews, send forth my people, and they will serve me. However, if you are unwilling to send them away, and you again hold fast with them, behold, the hand of Yahweh the ever-living, he will exist and shall bring upon your livestock that are in the plains, and upon your horses, and asses, and camels, and cattle, and sheep, a very severe death plague. But Yahweh the ever-living will distinguish between the livestock of Yasharel and between the livestock of Mitzrayim, and all the livestock of Yasharel, nothing shall die. And Yahweh said and appointed, and again, war of the gods, right? He's saying, look, in Goshen, where all the Hebrews are, nothing's going to die, nothing's going to harm them. You're going to see that this, if you turn to Yahweh, you too can experience life, right? And Yahweh, the ever-living, Dabar, he fashioned this on the morrow, and he caused to be destroyed all the livestock of Mitzrayim. But the livestock of the sons of Yasharel died not one. Pharaoh sent to examine, and he discovered that of the livestock of Yasharel, not any had died. That's interesting. He's like looking into it now. He's like, how in the world are all of our livestock dying and not his? Yet Pharaoh made heavy his heart. It would not send away the people. That has to be the thing. If anybody fears anything, I mean, when we're talking about a fear of God, a fear of Elohim, if you guys want to fear anything, it's having your heart hardened. And we've probably all seen, I'm sure you guys have seen, I have seen it in real time that put the fear of Elohim in me, where I saw godly, righteous people get so hardened that the entire Bible, that Yahweh became dark to them, just darkness. That like this is a reason why everybody here listening, you need to guard the commands. Like, guard the commands. Because if you do not, and if you don't do it with a humble, circumcised heart, if you do not seek to have a circumcised heart instead of circumcised flesh, this too can happen to you. And then you guys know, I'm not like a fear porn guy, but this is what I fear. Like, I do not want to have a hardened heart. And, it could be some spirit that enters me, like the spirit of jealousy or something like that. And Yahweh starts handing you over to your desires. And he starts giving you what you want. That's a scary prospect, to get everything that you desire. And Yahuwah, the ever-living, he declared to Al-Mashahah and Al-Aaron, lay hold to yourselves handfuls in both fists of suits from a furnace, and let Mashahah fling them unto Ha-Shamayam, to the heavens, before the eyes of Pharaoh. And he will exist as dust upon all the land of Mitzrayim, and he will exist upon man and upon beast as boils, breaking out into pustules in all the land of Mitzrayim. And they seized hold of the suits of the furnace, and they stood to the face of Pharaoh, and Mashahah flung it unto Ha-Shamayam. And the boils existed, with pustules breaking forth on man and on beast. And the sacred scribes were not able to stand to the face of Mashahah because of the face of the boils. Boils existed upon the sacred scribes and upon all Mitzrayim. But Yahuwah the ever-living strengthened Pharaoh's heart, so he would not hear and obey to them, just as Yahuwah the ever-living spoke to Mashahah. And Yahuwah the ever-living declared to Al-Mashahah, arise at daybreak and stand to the face of Pharaoh and say to him like this, thus says Yahuwah the ever-living, Allahayah of the Hebrews, send away my people that they may serve me, or else in an instant, like the stroke of a hammer or an anvil, or the tread of a foot. This time I will send all my slaughter weapons to your heart and in your people, so that you will know that there is not one like me in all the earth. For now I will send out my hand, and I will strike you and your people in the matter of the death plague, and you will be concealed from Ha'arats. On account of this, I have caused you to stand firm in opposition, to show you my strength, so that my name and character may be inscribed throughout all Ha'arats. Yet again, if you continue to lift yourself up against my people, to prevent them from going out, then behold, I will rain at the appointed time in the future a very fierce hail, such as has not been in Mitzrayim from the day it was established until now. This is an intense hail. I've been in some hailstorms, but I'll tell you, I've been in some golf ball size hailstorms, but this is going to be different. Therefore, send your livestock to seek refuge, and with all that belongs to you in the plains. So this is he's warning Pharaoh this time. He's like, you can divert this disaster just by listening to my command, and just do it. Just do the command. But I'm sure Pharaoh had grace, right? All the men and all the beasts which will be found in the plains and is not gathered into houses, then the hail will go down upon them and kill them. Those of the servants of Pharaoh who reverently feared Athbar Yahuwah gathered their servants and their livestock into their houses. So that's interesting. There were some of the servants of Pharaoh, and I'll let you in on one of them very soon here. But those who had not set his heart to Al-Dabar Yahuwah, then he left his servants and livestock in the plains. How in the world at this point could you be so brain dead? Like, after all this, to go like, yeah. I mean, you would have to be like just malpractice by this point, which kind of a scary thought that probably would happen more than I care to give credit to today. And Yahuwah declared to Mashahah, stretch out your hand to Ha-Shamayam and hail, and he will exist in all the land of Mitzrayim, upon man and upon beast, and upon all the herbs of the plain in the land of Mitzrayim. So Mashahah stretched forth his branch to Ha-Shamayam, and Yahuwah had given voices, and hail and fire. She did walk upon the earth, and he did pour down hail over the land of Mitzrayim. And hail, he did exist in fire from seizing hold in the midst of the hail, very cruel, such as had never existed in the land of Mitzrayim since it had become a nation. The hail He struck in all the land of Mitzrayim over all which was in the plains, from man and upon beast, and over all the green herbage of the plain. The hail he struck every tree of the plain, breaking it into pieces. Only in the land of Goshen, upon which at that time the sons of Yasharel dwelt, no hail existed there. So if there were any trees standing, any stop signs on the street corners standing, anything like that, any rooftops, I guess it didn't break through the roofs, right, if the animals came in. But that being stated, this is what we read in the Aramaic Targum. I did probably cite this a couple times in this Torah portion. Hiob or Job or Yov, who reverenced the word of Yahuwah among the servants of Pharaoh, gathered together his servants and his flocks within the house. But Balaam, who did not set his heart upon the word of Yahuwah, left his servants and his flocks in the field. That's messed up. He left his servants too. That's the Jonathan Targum there, 9:20-21. All right, and this is probably back into Jasher. Let's celebrate this. Notwithstanding this, the anger of Yahuwah did not turn away from the Egyptians, and his hand was yet stretched forth against them. And Elohim sent the pestilence, and the pestilence pervaded Egypt, and the horses and asses, and in the camels, and herds of oxen and sheep, and in man. And when the Egyptians rose up early in the morning to take their cattle to pasture, they found all their cattle dead. And there remained of the cattle of the Egyptians only 1 in 10, and of the cattle belonging to Yasharel and Goshen, not one died. So that's interesting there. It says that 1 in 10 survived of the Egyptians. And Elohim sent a burning inflammation in the flesh of the Egyptians, which burst their skins. Sounds lovely. And it became a severe itch in all the Egyptians from the soles of their feet to the crowns of their heads. That's the worst, like the feet. Man. It's like one thing when it's like, scratch your head, but man, your feet. And many boils were in their flesh, that their flesh wasted away until they became rotten and putrid. Notwithstanding this, the anger of Yahuwah did not turn away, and his hand was still stretched out over all Egypt. And Yahuwah sent a very heavy hail, which smote their vines and broke their fruit trees and dried them up, that they fell upon them. Also, every green herb became dry and perished, for a mingling fire descended amidst the hail. Therefore, the hail and the fire consumed all things. Also, men and beasts that were found abroad perished of the flames of fire and of the hail, and all the young lions were exhausted. That's kind of interesting, the young lions. And Yahuwah sent and brought numerous locusts into Egypt, the chasel, salam, chargol, and chagol, locusts each of its kind, which devoured all that the hail had left remaining. Then the Egyptians rejoiced at the locust, because they had food, although they consumed the produce of the field, and they caught them in abundance and salted them for food. And so Yahuwah is like, wait a second, no, you can't do that. That's cheating. And Yahuwah turned a mighty wind of the sea, which took away all the locusts. I imagine it's like in their hand, they're salting it, and the wind comes in like, oh man, it's like the flies off. Even those that were salted, so there you go. I wasn't imagining things, and thrust them into the Red Sea. Not one locust remained within the boundaries of Egypt. All right, we are almost done. We're going to finish this up, and then we're going to end with the Exodus story according to Egypt. And if you have never heard this before, you want to stay in it and hold on to something. Hold someone tight. Find a loved one and hug them while I read it. But let's finish today's Torah portion in the Paleo. And Pharaoh sent and called out for Moshe and for Aaron, and he said, swearing oaths, I have erred. This stroke of the anvil, Yahuwah Sadayak, the ever-living, is upright and just, and I and my people are the guilty ones. Entreat him, Al Yahuwah, that there should exist no more the voices, Alahayam, and the hail, and I will release you and will not more stand in opposition. We know that's not going to take. Tune in next week. And Moshe declared to him, in going outside the city, I will spread my palms to Yahuwah, the ever living. At that time, the voices will cease and the hail will not exist. Wait a second here. This is kind of really interesting. The voices of Alahayam. So he's hearing voices now, Pharaoh, and he wants those to stop, make the voices stop. And Moshe promises at that time the voices will cease and the hail will not exist, so that you know that Aratz belongs to Yahuwah, the ever-living Allah Hayam. So the flax and the barley were struck, for the barley was in Abayab, and the flax had budded, and the wheat and the rye were not smitten, given they were later. And Mashahah went out from Pharaoh, out of the city. He spread his palms to Yahuwah, the ever-living, and the voices ceased, and the hail did not drop down onto the land. But when Pharaoh observed that the rain and hail and voices had ceased, he again erred, and his heart was made heavy, both he and his servants. Why am I not surprised? And he seized the heart of Pharaoh, and he did not send away the sons of Yasharel, just as Yahuwah, the ever-living, had foretold by the hand of Mashahah. Now, at this point, I mean, it's all escalating, and you just figure like Moses is like, what now? I mean, like you have to, Moses is a super humble guy, all right? I mean, but he's got to have confidence by this point. Like he's got to go like, man, like all I did was just stretch out my rod or, whatever, and all these things happened, and Egypt is almost destroyed, and this guy is still like a hardened heart. Like, what in the world is going to happen next? So, of course, tune in next week, and let's turn to the Book of Manuscripts. This comes from the Colburn. Read a few books from Colburn. We went through a Book of Britain, Book of Wisdom, Book of Creation. I do love the Colburn for its many historical details, and this is absolutely wild. So, like I said, this is from the Egyptian perspective, chapter 5 of the Book of Manuscripts, the Destroyer, part 3. So yes, there is the Destroyer, part 1 and part 2. I'll just let you guys figure out who the Destroyer is. I've commented on this before. It probably is the same as El Shaddai, right? So whenever we're singing El Shaddai, the Amy Grant song, it's all sweets and little guitar and flowers and stuff like that. And it's like, yeah, I'm not sure the Egyptians would have, it's more like they would have played it to like a heavy metal song or something like that. The doom shape called the Destroyer in Egypt was seen in all the lands thereabouts. Now, a lot of people will say that the Destroyer is talking about like Nibiru or something like that. But then get this, in color, it was bright and fiery. In appearance, changing and unstable. It twisted about itself like a coil, like serpentine, like water bubbling into a pool from an underground supply. And all men agree it was a most fearsome sight. It was not a great comet or a lucent star, being more like a fiery body of flame. And so now, if you ever wanted to know what the pillar of fire was, this is how the Egyptians are describing it. So the entire time all this was happening with all these plagues in Egypt, the Destroyer was there, El Shaddai, this fiery pillar is there. They could all see it, and this is how they're describing it. Its movements on high were slow. Below it swirled in the manner of smoke, and it remained close to the sun, whose face it hid. There was a bloody redness about it. So it's almost like it's a plague almost on Ra, the sun god, as well. It's blocking out the sun. So there was a bloody redness about it, which changed as it passed along its course. It caused death and destruction in its rising and setting. It swept the earth with great cinder rain and caused many plagues, hunger and other evils. So they're accrediting this pillar of fire, the Destroyer, to the plagues of Egypt. It bit the skin of men and beasts until they became mottled with sores. We saw that tonight. The earth was troubled and shook. The hills and mountains moved and rocked. The dark smoke-filled heavens bowed over earth, and a great howl came to the ears of living men. Are those little voices that Pharaoh was hearing? It describes it as great howls, borne to them upon the wings of the wind. It was the cry of the dark Lord, the master of dread. Thick clouds of fiery smoke passed before him, and there was an awful hail of hot stones and coals of fire. The doom shape thundered sharply in the heavens and shot out bright lightnings. The channels of water were turned back into themselves when the land tilted, and great trees were tossed about and snapped like twigs. So we saw that too, like the when the hail comes down, that it just devastates, just snaps the trees, right? Then a voice like 10,000 trumpets was heard over the wilderness. So there's more of that voice for you. And I love that, like the 10,000 trumpets. You know, when you think about the apocalypse trumpet sounds that people hear all over the world, some people are saying it's from the dumb tunnels or things like that. And, you know, I don't know. I mean, maybe it is, but like, what if it's actually coming from heaven, right? So they hear the voice like 10,000 trumpets was heard over the wilderness. And before its burning breath, the flames parted. The whole of the land moved and mountains melted. The sky itself roared like 10,000 lions in agony. And where did we see the lions in agony tonight too? In Jasher. And bright arrows of blood sped back and forth across its face. Earth swelled up like bread upon the hearth. This was the aspect of the doom shape called the destroyer when it appeared in days long gone by, in olden times. It is thus described in the old records, few of which remain. Isn't that interesting? So we see that records are being scrubbed, right? So they're saying that what they're describing, there were multiple records of it at one time from different sources. It is said that when it appears in the heavens above, earth splits open from the heat, like a nut roasted before the fire. This would be the day of the Lord. This is what a lot of people, Bible believers with good intent, get wrong. They get, every time they read about the day of the Lord, the day of Yahuwah, they're like, that's a future event. It's a one-day event. It's like, no. There's been many days of Yahuwah. It's not just a one-time event. This was, you could stack this up to the day of Yahuwah. Then flames shoot up through the surface and leap about like fiery fiends upon black blood. The moisture inside the land is all dried up. The pastures and cultivated places are consumed in flames, and they and all trees become white ashes. So that's pretty intense. Like Egypt was just wiped out from flames. The doom shape is like a circling ball of flame, which scatters small fiery offspring in its train. It covers about a fifth part of the sky and sends writhing snake-like fingers down to earth. So are those the flaming serpents, the seraphim angels? It's talking about these writhing snake-like fingers down to earth that's coming out of it. I think that's what it is. I think it's describing angels coming out. Before it, the sky appears frightened, and it breaks up and scatters away. Midday is no brighter than night. It spawns a host of terrible things. These are things said of the destroyer in the old records. Read them with solemn heart, knowing that the doom shape has its appointed time and will return. It would be foolish to let them go unheeded. Now men say, such things are not destined for our days. May the great Allahayam above grant that this be so. But come the day surely will, and in accordance with his nature, man will be unprepared. Chapter 6, the dark days. And the dark days refers to the plagues of Egypt. The dark days began with the last visitation of the destroyer, and they were foretold by strange omens in the skies. All men were silent and went about with pale faces. The leaders of the slaves, which had built a city to the glory of Pham, stirred up unrest. So who are the leaders of the slaves? That would be Aaron and Moshe. And these slaves, we know that it says here, they built a city to the glory of Pham. And these leaders stirred up unrest amongst the slaves. So, get back to work. No soup for you. And no man raised his arm against them. They foretold great events of which the people were ignorant and of which the temple seers were not informed. That makes sense because we see this again with Balaam and his servants. All these wizards, they could look in their books, they could look in the mysteries, they could do things, but they had no knowledge of what was happening. This just caught them totally off guard in their pride, in their stubborn hearts. These were days of ominous calm when the people waited for they knew not what. The presence of an unseen doom was felt. The hearts of men were stricken. Laughter was heard no more, and grief and wailing sounded throughout the land. Even the voices of children were stilled, and they did not play together, but stood silent. The slaves became bold and insolent. And what did the slaves do? We'll see next week. They actually loot Egypt. They become so bold and insolent that they go up to their masters and be like, yeah, I'll take all that stuff in your house. All that jewelry, all those clothes. And they didn't like go in and just steal it. Like the people handed it over, like, yeah, take it. Just get out of here. Just go. And women were the possession of any man. Fear walked the land. And when it says women were the possession of any man, I'm taking that to be the Egyptians now, not the slaves. They're just like succumbing to their almost their wickedness. They're just freaking out. Fear walked the land, and women became barren with terror. They could not conceive, and those with child aborted. Well, where have we read that before? That actually comes from Jasher as well. Not in the Exodus account, but with when the patriarchs went to Egypt, and it talked about with when they confronted Joseph over Benjamin, and it talked about how the women in Egypt aborted. So it's kind of interesting connection there. All men closed up within themselves. The days of stillness were followed by a time when the noise of trumpeting and shrilling was heard in the heavens, and the people became as frightened beasts without a herdsman, as asses when lions prowl without their fold. Can you imagine? Like, I talked about how loud the frogs were, but it's like, sounds like these trumpets are blasting for a long time. I mean, can you imagine? That had to be amazing to behold. I mean, just absolutely amazing to be one of the slaves, and you're one of the Hebrews. You're looking up, you're seeing El Shaddai up there. You're seeing this fiery pillar up there, night and day, and you're just these trumpets just blasting. I mean, I guess eventually you just learn to sleep through it, right? But that just had to be amazing to behold. The people spoke of the Alahayam of the slaves, and so we're speaking about Yahuwah here, the God of the slaves. And reckless men said, if we knew where this Alahayam were to be found, we would sacrifice to him. Now they're confused because they're looking for idols, right? They looked through the record book. There is no idol of Yahuwah in Egypt. They can't even, and this is a part of their undoing, is that they couldn't even bring themselves apparently to fathom that there is an Alahayam that is above. You can't. He is not represented by anything on this earth. But the Alahayam of the slaves was not among them. He was not to be found within swamplands or in the brick pits. His manifestation was in the heavens for all men to see. That is like, ooh, that just gives me chills right there. But they did not see with understanding, nor would any God listen, for all were dumb because of the hypocrisy of men. So none of the other Alahayam would listen either. But the Kolbrin talks about this a lot. They talk about how the sun, the fact we see this glorious sun, the sun itself is not the end means. That is not to be worshipped. The moon is not to be worshipped, right? The stars are not to be worshipped. The sun is there to tell us that there is a greater light beyond the sun. That this greater light, it can't even be. Nothing down here properly reflects it, right? And I mean, that's in true Platonic terms, obviously. And of course, man turns to idolatry because that's, in their simplicity of their minds, the normies, that's all they can really, make sense of. The dead were no longer scared and were thrown into the waters. Those already entombed were neglected, and many became exposed. They lay unprotected against the hands of thieves. So there you got some Egyptian grave robbers right there. He who once toiled long in the sun, bearing the yoke himself, now possessed oxen. He who grew no grain now owned a storehouse full. He who once dwelt at ease among his children now thirsted for water. He who once sat in the sun with crumbs and dregs was now bloated with food. He reclined in the shade, his bowels overflowing. Cattle were left. So I think that they're saying here that those who lived in comfort were thrown in discomfort. Those who had already been in discomfort, now they're just going in, they're ransacking everything, they're robbing tombs, throwing bodies out, no respect for the dead, no respect for their gods or the religion anymore. And they're just, filling themselves on the food of the rich and spoils of war, that kind of stuff. Cattle were left unattended to roam in strange pastures, and men ignored their marks and slew the beast of their neighbors. No man owned anything. The public records were cast forth and destroyed, and no man knew who were slaves and who were masters. The people cried out to the Pharaoh in their distress, but he stopped his ears and acted like a deaf man. So there we have a total agreement with everything we've read in Jasher, the Bible, everything. It's basically, Yahuwah hardened his heart. Whereas it says here, he stopped his ears and acted like a deaf man. There were those who spoke falsely before Pharaoh and had gods hostile towards the land. Therefore, the people cried out for their blood to appease it. But it was not these strange priests who put strife in the land instead of peace. For one was even of the house of Pharaoh and walked among the people unhampered. Dust and smoke clouds darkened the sky and colored the waters upon which they fell with a bloody hue. Plague was throughout the land. The river was bloody, and blood was everywhere. Total compliance with Exodus. The water was vile, and men's stomachs shrank from drinking. Those who did drink from the river vomited it up, for it was polluted. The dust tore wounds in the skin of man and beast. In the glow of the destroyer, the earth was filled with redness. Vermin bred and filled the air and face of the earth with loathsomeness. Wild beasts, afflicted with torments under the lashing sand and ashes, came out of their lairs in the wastelands and cave places and stalked the abodes of men. So we saw this in Jasher. We talked about all the wild beasts coming in and coming to people's homes and stuff, right? They're coming out of the wastelands. That is in total compliance with Jasher. All the tame beasts whimpered, and the land was filled with the cries of sheep and moans of cattle. Trees throughout the land were destroyed, and no herb of fruit was to be found. The face of the land was battered and devastated by a hail of stones, which smashed down all that stood in the path of the torrent. They swept down in hot showers, and strange flowing fire ran along the ground in their wake. That, again, straight out of Jasher. How in the world did that happen? How in the world did that just agree with the book of Jasher? Because it talked about the hails. It doesn't say that in Exodus, but it says in, at least from my reading of it, it said in Jasher that there was a fire mixed with these strange stones that came down. And that's what this says right here. The fish of the river died in the polluted waters. Worms, insects, and reptiles sprang up from the earth in huge numbers. Again, we saw that in Jasher. We didn't talk about that in Exodus, though. Great gusts of wind brought swarms of locusts, which covered the sky. Remember that? The locusts, they're salting, right? They're like, yeah, locusts. And they start salting when the wind blows them away again. As the destroyer flung itself through the heavens, it blew great gusts of cinders across the face of the land. The gloom, so there's like, now it's like a fire, Risa, right now. The actual fire is coming from Allah Hayam. The gloom of the long night spread a dark mantle of blackness, which extinguished every ray of light. How exciting is that? They just described the plague of darkness. None knew when it was day and when it was night, for the sun cast no shadow. The darkness was not the clean blackness of night, but a thick darkness in which the breath of man was stopped in their throats. Men gasped in a hot cloud of vapor, which enveloped all the land and snuffed out all lamps and fires. Wow, so this darkness is so extreme, it's actually snuffing out light. Any light, anything you would kindle, just snuffs it out, unless if you're living in Goshen. Men were benumbed and lay moaning in their beds. None spoke to another or took food, for they were overwhelmed with despair. Ships were sucked away from their moorings and destroyed in great whirlpools. I wonder if this has anything to do with that strange creature from the Black Lagoon that came up out of the sea and started like lifting up roofs, created these whirlpools. And I wonder if there's a Leviathan connection there. It was a time of undoing. The earth turned over as clay spun upon a potter's wheel. The whole land was filled with uproar from the thunder of the destroyer overhead and the cry of the people. There was the sound of moaning and lamentation on every side. The earth spewed up its dead. Corpses were cast up out of the resting places, and the embalmed were revealed to the sight of all men. Pregnant women miscarried, and the seed of men was stopped. The craftsman left his task undone. The potter abandoned his wheel, and the carpenter his tools, and they departed to dwell in the marshes. All crafts were neglected, and their slaves lured the craftsmen away. The dues of Pharaoh could not be collected, for there was neither wheat nor barley, goose nor fish. The rights of Pharaoh could not be enforced, for the fields of grain and the pastures were destroyed. The highborn and the lowly prayed together that life might come to an end, and the turmoil and thundering ceased to beat upon their ears. Terror was the companion of men by day, and horror their companion by night. Men lost their senses and became mad. They were distracted by frightfulness. On the great night of the destroyer's wrath, when its terror was at its height, there was a hail of rocks, and the earth heaved, a pain rent her bowels. And the earth heaved as pain rent her bowels. Gates, columns, and walls were consumed by fire, and the statues of gods were overthrown and broken. People fled outside their dwellings in fear and were slain by the hail. Those who took shelter from the hail were swallowed when the earth split open. Now that's a kind of an interesting telling there. I don't know if this is the Passover night, because it's talking about on the great night of the destroyer's wrath. This is actually the Passover night. This is one of the ways the angel of death killed people, or if this is still talking about the hail that came down. The habitations of men collapsed upon those inside, and there was panic on every side. So, for example, when the angel of death went and killed the firstborn, I don't know, how did he do it? Did he collapse roofs on people? I don't really know. I wasn't there. But the slaves who lived in huts in the reedlands at the place of pits were spared. And so, isn't that interesting? So all these people are dying, and in Goshen, and it describes, I like how it describes it, in huts in the reedlands at the place of the pits. The pits is where they would make the bricks, right? They were spared. The land burnt like tinder. A man watched upon his rooftops, and the heavens hurled wrath upon him, and he died. The land writhed under the wrath of the destroyer and groaned with the agony of Egypt. It shook itself, and the temples and palaces of the nobles were thrown down from their foundations. The highborn ones perished in the midst of the ruins. And I wonder if that's, here we go. And all the strength of the land was stricken, even the great one. The firstborn of Pharaoh died with the highborn in the midst of the terror and falling stones. So I'm wondering if the highborn, it says that the highborn ones perished. This is at the height of the destroyer. I'm wondering if this is a reference to the firstborns. The highborns were the firstborns. The children of princes were cast out into the streets, and those who were not cast out died within their abodes. There were 9 days of darkness and upheaval, while a tempest raged such as never had been known before. When it passed away, brother buried brother throughout the land. Men rose up against those in authority and fled from the cities to dwell in tents in the outlands. Egypt lacked great men to deal with the times, because they were all killed off, or really, if whatever survived. The people were weak from fear and bestowed gold, silver, lapis lazuli, turquoise, and copper upon the slaves. And that's where we're going to read next week, where Egypt like Israel just looted Egypt, but in such a way that their masters were like, just go, just take everything, just get out of here. We don't ever want to see you again. Just take our stuff. And to their priests, they gave chalices, urns, and ornaments. Pharaoh alone remained calm and strong in the midst of confusion, because, as they said, he was close his eyes, fingers to his ears. The people turned to wickedness and their weakness and despair. Harlots walked through the streets unashamed. Women paraded their limbs and flaunted their womanly charms. Highborn women were in rags, and the virtuous were mocked. And that's where they said earlier that wives were just exchanged and that kind of stuff. The slaves spared by the destroyer left the accursed land forthwith. And again, these are the Hebrews. Their multitude moved in the gloom of a half dawn under a mantle of fine swirling gray ash, leaving the burnt fields and shattered cities behind them. What a scene that had to be. Many Egyptians attached themselves to the host. And we know this again. We're going to go into this in Exodus, that many of the Gentiles decided to become Hebrews and follow them into the wilderness. For one who was great led them forth. That would be Moses. So let me say this again. Read this again. Many Egyptians attached themselves to the host. For one who was great led them forth. A priest prince of the inner courtyard. Wow. So that's Moshe right there. Fire mounted up on high, and its burning left with the enemies of Egypt. It rose up from the ground as a fountain and hung as a curtain in the sky. In 7 days, by Rimwar, the accursed ones journeyed to the waters. They crossed the heaving wilderness while the hills melted around them. Above, the skies were torn. It should be torn with lightning. They were sped by terror, but their feet became entangled in the land, and the wilderness shut them in. They knew not the way, for no sign was constant before them. They turned before Noshari and stopped at Shokath, the place of quarries. They passed the waters of Maha and came by the valley of Pikaroth, northward of Mara. They came up against the waters which blocked their way. And this would be the Reed Sea. And their hearts were in despair. The night was a night of fear and dread, for there was a high moaning above, and black winds from the underworld were loosed. Wow. Like Sheol itself, like moaning from Sheol. Or wind, yeah, the voice is the wind from Sheol. And fire sprang up from the ground. The hearts of the slaves shrank within them, for they knew the wrath of Pharaoh followed them, and that there was no way of escape. They hurled abuse on those who led them. Strange rites were performed along the shore that night. The slaves disputed among themselves, and there was violence. And now I'll try to cover that when we get there, that there was like 4 different camps within the Hebrews, within the Israelites. And I think only one of them, agreed with Moshe. They were just turning in every which direction. They really were thrown in despair, which is unbelievable to think about, that you would actually walk out of a burning. It's like the ending to Pirates of the Caribbean when the whole thing is burnt down and it's all embers and stuff like that. And there's like skeletons everywhere. And you're walking out with the treasures and the loot. And it's like they're still freaking out. They have like the destroyer El Shaddai above them. And it's just unbelievable. It just goes to show that it doesn't matter if you're standing in the presence of the Most High. If you don't want to pursue righteousness, there's nothing that anyone can do for you. So it's best to pursue righteousness not in His presence. Pharaoh had gathered his army and followed the slaves. After he departed, there were riots and disorders behind him, for the cities were plundered. The laws were cast out of the judgment halls and trampled underfoot in the streets. The storehouses and granaries were burst open and robbed. Roads were flooded, and none could pass along them. People lay dead on every side. The place was split, and the princes and officials fled, so that none was left with authority to command. The list of numbers were destroyed. Public places were overthrown, and households became confused and unknown. Pharaoh pressed on in sorrow, for behind him all was desolation and death. Before him were things he could not understand, and he was afraid, but he carried himself well and stood before his host with courage. He sought to bring back the slaves, for the people said their magic was greater than the magic of Egypt. Their magic was greater than the magic of Egypt, but it didn't go well for you. So why? It's funny, like the people who understood, like if you want to put it in terms of magic, they're like, wow, the magic of these Hebrews God is really great. I'm going to follow this God. I'm going to follow this God out to the wilderness. They had the right idea because they got it, because they're like, he just destroyed all this, so I'm going to go where he goes. And the others are like, yeah, bring him back. That's just like those are the normies talking. The host of Pharaoh came upon the slaves by the saltwater shores, but was held back from them by a breath of fire. A great cloud was spread over the host and darkened the sky. None could see except for the fiery glow and the unceasing lightnings which rent the covering cloud overhead. And you guys will recall that the cloud came down. It was light for Yasharal, but it was darkness for Pharaoh. And it's kind of interesting that they're seeing lightnings in there. A whirlwind arose in the east and swept over the encamped host. A gale raged all night, and in the red twilight dawn, there was a movement of the earth. The waters receded from the seashore and were rolled back on themselves. There was a strange silence, and then in the gloom, it was seen that the waters had parted, leaving a passage between. Is this text not incredible or what? The land had risen, but it was disturbed and trembled. The way was not straight or clear. The waters about were as if spun within a bowl. The swampland alone remained undisturbed. From the horn of the destroyer came a high, shrilling noise which stopped the ears of men. The slaves had been making sacrifices in despair. Their lamentations were loud. Now, before the strange sight, there was hesitation and doubt. For the space of a breath, they stood still and silent. Then all was confusion and shouting, some pressing forward into the waters against all who sought to flee back from the unstable ground. So that's interesting. So it's almost like we get this idea that Pharaoh, commanded the men. Maybe he did. I don't know. But according to this text, it's the idea that they fled into the waters because of the unstable earth behind them. So Yahuwah is driving them into the water to destroy them. Then in exaltation, their leader led them into the midst of the waters through the confusion. Yet many sought to turn back into the host behind them, while others fled along the empty shores. So actually, I take that back. I'm sorry. That's talking about the Hebrews there. And so it seemed like some people, some people just can't follow the shepherd, guys. I mean, I don't know how to say this in any other light. You can have Yahushua HaMashiach there, and it's like walk as Messiah walked, right? That's the phrase. What would Jesus do? You walk as he walked. And I kid you not, like, it's like we have the directions, they're laid out in scripture, the Torah, and it's like he's walking and he's doing something, and it's like everyone's going off in different directions. I guess that's the difference between the sheep and the goats, right? And so apparently, according to this, there were people who maybe they ran off in different directions. Nobody saw them again. All became still over the sea and upon the shore, but behind the earth shook and boulders split with a great noise. The wrath of heaven was removed to a distance and stood upwards of the two hosts. Still the host of Pharaoh held its ranks firm and resolved before the strange and awful happenings, and undaunted by the fury which raged by their side. Stern faces were lit darkly by the fiery curtain. Then the fury departed, so this pillar rises up, the destroyer rises up. The fury departed, and there was silence. Stillness spread over the land while the host of Pharaoh stood without movement in the red glow. Then with a shout, the captains went forward, and the host rose up behind them. The curtain of fire had rolled up into a dark, billowing cloud which spread out as a canopy. There was a stirring of the waters, but they followed the evildoers past the place of the great whirlpool. The passage was confused in the midst of the waters, and the ground beneath unstable. Here in the midst of a tumult of waters, Pharaoh fought against the hindmost of the slaves and prevailed over them, and there was a great slaughter amid the sand, the swamp, and the water. The slaves cried out in despair, but their cries were unheeded. Their possessions were scattered. Now, if I'm reading this right, the slaves that he's defeating here in the middle of the Reed Sea are those who were kind of going off in different directions and not following orders. And we often think about the water split right down the middle. That's how they show in the Hollywood films. But, interesting enough, according to a lot of Jewish literature, there may have been actually multiple different, like it might have been each tribe going through its own, like it maybe didn't part in one area, it could have parted in many different areas. And this is describing almost like more like a labyrinth, kind of like it seems like a whirlpool and kind of crazy. And some people are just, like I said, they're just not following orders. They're marching orders. They're not following their shepherd. They're just doing their own thing, and it sounds like they're getting lost in the weeds. Their possessions were scattered behind them as they fled, so that the way was easier for them than for those who followed. Then the stillness was broken by a mighty roar, and through the rolling pillars of cloud, the wrath of the destroyer descended upon the host. The heavens roared as with 1,000 thunders. The bowels of the earth were sundered, and the earth shrieked its agony. The cliffs were torn away and cast down. The dry ground filled beneath the waters, and great waves broke upon the shore, sweeping in rocks from seaward. The great surge of rocks and waters overwhelmed the chariots of the Egyptians who went before the footmen. The chariot of the Pharaoh was hurled into the air as if by a mighty hand and was crushed in the midst of the rolling waters. Tidings of the disaster came back by Rajab, son of Thomat, who hastened on ahead of the terrified survivors because of his burning. He brought reports into the people that the host had been destroyed by blast and deluge. The captains had gone, the strong men had fallen, and none remained to command. Therefore, the people revolted because of the calamities which had befallen them, as if they hadn't already been revolting. Cowards slunk from their lairs and came forth boldly to assume the high offices of the dead. Calmly and noble women, their protectors gone, were their prey. Of the slaves, the great number had perished before the host of Pharaoh. The broken land lay helpless, and invaders came out of the gloom like carrion. A strange people came up against Egypt, and none stood to fight, for strength and courage were gone. Now, I'm not prepared to do this tonight, but I do have notes where I talk about when this actually is shown in history, that these invaders came up after Egypt was weakened, and they completely destroyed Egypt afterwards. So it's like Egypt was already destroyed, and these invaders came in and just take a wrecking ball to whatever's left. And of course, Egypt was never the same again after that. The invaders, led by Al-Canaan, came up out of the land of gods, because of the wrath of heaven, which had laid their land waste. There too had been a plague of reptiles and ants, signs and omens, and an earthquake. There also had been turmoil and disaster, disorder and famine, with the gray breath of the destroyer sweeping the ground and stopping the breath of men. So that's interesting. So the destroyer, what was going on in Egypt, spread to other areas of the earth as well. They all felt it. And Torah gathered together the remains of his fighting men and the fighting men who were left in Egypt, and set forth to meet the children of darkness who came out of the eastern mountains by way of the wilderness and by way of Yethnobis. They fell upon the stricken land from behind the gray cloud, before the lifting of the darkness and before the coming of the purifying winds. Let's see how much further. Okay, last page. Here we go. Rajab went with Pharaoh and met the invaders at Haroshur, but the hearts of the Egyptians were faint within them. Their spirits were no longer strong, and they fell away before the battle was lost. Deserted by the gods above and below, they were judged by Yahweh. Their dwellings destroyed, their households scattered. They were as men already half dead. Their hearts were still filled with terror and with the memory of the wrath which had struck them from out of heaven. They were still filled with the memory of the fearsome sight of the destroyer, and they knew not what they did. Pharaoh did not return to his city. He lost his heritage and was seized by a demon for many days. It's interesting here because it says that Pharaoh didn't die, and it seems like all the accounts, they all agree on that. His army died, but he didn't die. His women were polluted, but his chariot was wrecked in the ocean. So somehow he was able to climb out of the ocean. Like it didn't take him like everybody else. Anyways, his women were polluted, meaning that as they described, the cowards coming out, the weak people, now they were coming out and they were taking everyone's women. And his estates plundered. The children of darkness defiled the temples with rams and ravished women who were crazed and did not resist. Who are these children of darkness? The Corbin talks about like these children of darkness in other areas, and it's almost like makes them out be like this race of like the children of like Satan or whatever. I mean, I don't know if these are like the Rephaim or what, but it seems like they were reserved to come in, and these demons that took over Pharaoh here. It seems to be a connection with the children of darkness. Anyways, the children of darkness defiled the temples with rams and ravished women who were crazed and did not resist. They enslaved all who were left, the old, young men, and boys. They oppressed the people, and their delight was in mutilation and torture. That's a sad end for those who decided not to leave with the Hebrews. Pharaoh abandoned his hopes and fled into the wilderness beyond the province of the lake, which is in the west towards the south. He lived a goodly life among the sand wanderers and wrote books. I would love to get my hands on those books. Good times came again, even under the invaders, and ships sailed upstream. The air was purified, the breath of the destroyer passed away, and the land became filled again with growing things. Life was renewed throughout the whole land. Care taught these things to the children of light in the days of darkness, after the building of the Rambudith, before the death of the Pharaoh Ankid. This is written in this land and in our tongue by Luidar, who himself chose it for saving. It was not seen until the later days. All right. Well, that concludes tonight's Torah portions. I hope you guys enjoyed that. I mean, that last part with Coburn was wild. I love going through Pamela's translations. There'll be more next week. So there's going to be no late show tonight, so you guys can all turn in early. I will as well. Shabbat Shalom, everybody. One more time. Enjoy your weekend. Get lots of rest. We'll do this again next week.